Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. How are you? We are in November now. We're just kind of roaring to the end of the year. I can't believe it. Let me tell you a little bit about what you can expect in this episode. And then I want to talk about, we missed the podcast's 4-year anniversary, which was October 29th of this year. And I just forgot when I did the last recording. We're recording ahead of time. I just didn't catch it. This is not uncommon. But let me tell you what you can expect in this episode. And then I am going to talk about just some little milestones that they're not little, they're very big, significant milestones for the podcast. This episode, Jen and I talk about how many of you are the helper in the relationship, the giver, the caretaker, the one that shows up and is really there for people. And do you allow other people to be there for you? Are your relationships reciprocal? We talk about in this episode some of the things that happen and the beautiful connection and sense of community that can happen when either we allow others to be there for us or others allow us to be there for them. What we're not talking about is one-sided relationships because it just doesn't work. But Jen talks about overperforming. I talk about it in terms of overfunctioning, where we are doing a lot of the work in the relationship and not allowing people to show up for us. And we talk a little bit, I talk about it more. Jen had to hop off the call. So I stay on a little bit and talk about where some of that wounding can come from and how to assess and look at it. But I think that this is a really big thing because as a deep thinker, a deep feeler, a highly sensitive person, it's so easy for us to anticipate what people are needing and wanting, and we know how to show up for people. But do we allow people to show up for us? And if we don't, we talk about what some of that may be about. I think it's just a beautiful conversation. And I share about a friend allowing me to be there for her today. And really, I went just expecting to be present for her, and I got some beautiful gifts. And that's part of what happens when we allow people to be there for us. I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful episode. Let's talk about the podcast. So on October 29th, 2022, this podcast is 4 years old. I can't believe it. By the time you hear this, I'm recording this on September 21st, 2022. At this point, we have 531,000 downloads. I would expect that by the time you're hearing this, we should have somewhere around 550,000 downloads, which is just, it's incredible. If you think about how many people a stadium holds, how many people are listening to the things that Jen and I and all of my guests have had to say. I'm deeply, deeply thankful and appreciative and grateful to each and every one of you, especially if you've shared this with other people. I know some people have written blogs and been mentioned in magazine articles. So thank you to everybody who has been part of this journey. 4 years ago, actually it was 4 years and 17 months, I bought a podcasting course and did not even think that I would be able to, what if I didn't do it? What if I didn't follow through? I was so scared. It really has been a beautiful journey. It's really helped me to grow up. And the place where I'm at right now with the podcast is I talk about the things that feel like they're meaningful and important to Jen and I, the things that our clients are talking about. It feels like it's real, it's raw, and it's honest, it's vulnerable. I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you, that you have beautiful gifts and talents to offer the world. And my hope is that by the stories that Jen and I share with you, and as we share our struggles, that it just normalizes and validates that it's okay to have deep feelings and to have wounding, and we can be in healthy relationships even with our wounding because our healing takes place in relationship. I just am very, very grateful for you. I don't know if I said this, but there are also 264 episodes by the time you hear this that will have been produced in 4 years. And you figure there are 52 weeks in a year, 54? I always forget about how many cards are in a deck of cards and how many weeks are in the year. But initially I was doing bonus episodes and a lot of extra recording. So that's a lot of content for 4 years. So it's important for me to acknowledge this is an important milestone. Many podcasts don't make it past the first handful of episodes. So this is really significant. So thank you to each and every one that are been here on this process with me. I'm just so grateful. And now on to the show with Jen. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. How am I? It's always such a great question. I love it when you ask it too, because I know you want a sincere answer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and sometimes I have to go in and like seek my truth to speak my truth. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, how am I? I'm just going to ask myself for a moment. I'm a little rough. I'm a little rough, honey.
Yeah. You've had a rough couple
sad.
days.
I'm scared.
Yeah.
I'm tired. Yeah, it's a little tough.
I know.
But it feels good to speak it. It feels good to be honest about it and to not stuff it.
Yeah.
And just show up with a smile.
Yeah. Which is what we can do. We can show up, have things be rough and still be present for what we need, or as present as we can be, which is exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. It's amazing how I don't even necessarily have to get into it, but just, having you hold that space and accept me and be welcoming, and it's okay for me to be messy. And I'm feeling pretty rough right now. Pretty raw.
Yeah.
Oh, my dear, but thank you for holding space. And I have enough space in me to be able to ask you, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. I want to jump in. We have a pretty limited amount of time that we have to record because of time constraints today. So my taskmaster's getting ready to hit the horses and go, yeehaw, let's go.
All right. Woo!
I want to talk about this concept of allowing others to be there for us when we're struggling and what that can create. Now, the other conversation that I think we need to have another time and not today is many of us give and give and give and are often in relationships that are not reciprocal. And so I want to be very clear that I'm not talking, well, if you're the person who's giving all the time and not receiving, then I think that this may apply to you. But what I'm talking about is relationships that have reciprocity in them. And many of us who are givers have a very hard time receiving. It's a way that we get connection. It's a way that we get a sense of meaning and purpose without having to spill out and have any needs for other people. And many of us are very adept at showing up for other people, but do we allow others to be there for us? And what I want to jump into to give you specific information is, I was telling you, Jen, last week that a friend of mine had surgery and I had intended to get flowers for her. And then I just wasn't able to. And I was telling you, I feel like I'm just such a terrible friend when it comes to showing up for people physically. And that was my narrative, which is incorrect, by the way. What I did do was the night before I reached out and asked how she was feeling about her surgery. The day that she had her surgery, we connected in the morning. I made sure to reach out to her that day. I was very ill, but it was important for me to let her know that I was emotionally present for her, but I was beating myself up for not being physically present. Now, fast forward to last night and tonight, my very good friend Jean, who I've talked about before, has two sweet dogs. And so I'm going to jump to the chase. Mimi, her dog, is fine. She doesn't have cancer. So y'all can rest in that. But last night, she thought that Mimi might have cancer. And so that was really hard on her. And we were talking this morning and I'm like, what do you need? She's like, the next time I see you, I just need a hug. I just gotten up, fed the dogs, gotten dressed. I was just getting ready to take Gracie for a walk. I'm like, I can come over and give you a hug. She's like, I kind of need to have a good cry. I'm like, I'm there. And she wasn't sure. And then she said, okay, I hadn't had breakfast. I grabbed a cup of coffee and ran over to her house because that's easy. And she allowed me to be there for her. And I spent the morning at her house. She cried. We spent time with the dogs. We got the information that it's not cancer. It may be something else, but not as, devastating as cancer. So for the moment, everything seems fine. And, she made me breakfast and we ended up doing some art projects and I've really been stifled creatively. And it ended up being a beautiful moment. But what occurred to me as I was on my way over there is you had said recently to Jen that you're aware that you have so much to give. And there are people in your life that allow you to show up for them. And there are other people that don't, when you could really be contributing and making their life easier, but they just don't let you in. And I thought, you know what? I don't think it's that I don't show up physically for people. I think some people, like this friend who had surgery, has a hard time having needs and wants and will not reach out in the moment when they're struggling. And what I loved is Jean and I have been staying connected, and she was able to say, like, I really need a hug. I'm like, I'm there. It was so easy to be there and to be present. And Jean has developed this beautiful community of people around her. She is a cancer survivor, and she has people stay with her when they have cancer because she just loves taking care of. I've talked about when I broke my wrist, she brought me soup. When my mom got sick, she made her soup. The same friend who had surgery had a previous surgery, and Jean made soup for her. Jean doesn't even know her. You know, Jean is just the most generous and kind and loving person. And so she has this beautiful flow of a handful of people in her life where there's just this beautiful reciprocity. And I think often in my mind, my thought is like, ugh, do I have it in me to go give? And with Jean, I totally do. But I went with such an open heart and then received these beautiful gifts and this connection. And it really, I've been in this kind of quiet, withdrawn place. All I want to do is watch my show on Netflix. I'm, not paddling right now. I'm just resting. But this was so deeply satisfying and fulfilling. But I went with the intention of just being present for her. And so I want to give you a chance to say something, Jen, but how much of this is resonating for you, the listener? Are you the one that's always there for other people? Do you end up feeling fulfilled afterwards? Do you feel drained? Do you allow people to be there for you? It's so easy for those of us that have wounding to go to like, I'm fine, I don't need anything. If I count on people and they can't show up, it opens up even more wounding. I mean, this is a really big thing. I see you with your eyes closed and one eye popping open at me.
Oh my God, I'm going to try not to cry. It's beautiful what you've described. And as you were talking, this reciprocity, right? So I need to kind of own my own stuff where for many, many years in my life, identifying as the helper, the giver, like I am half baked by the time I'm reaching out for help. I'm in pretty bad straits. And it's funny, I have a lot of houseplants and they're sort of my gauge. Like if I have a houseplant not do well or die, I'm like, oh, I got to reach out for help. Because I don't know what to do with my, like, whether it's my ADHD, they're like my little barometers. And being ashamed at having needs myself, being an overperformer, showing up. I've been known to go like way over the top. And then, obviously in our careers, it's designed to be really one-sided, right? I mean, we do get energetically reimbursed and we get financially, obviously, monetarily reimbursed for our work and our role. But I do get so much from my clients. I love my clients so dearly. But the role is I show up for you and you don't have to worry about me at all, even though a lot of my clients do. And I assure them that I have people holding space for me and my own therapy and supervision and friends and everything. But as I'm listening to you speak about your experience with Jean, I had a little picture pop into my mind of food, of eating, and just how soul nourishing it is in this reciprocity. It's almost like sharing a soul meal. And what a privilege it is to be there for someone. And also what a privilege it is to allow someone to be there for me. And it's a flow, it's a nourishment. It just, because I know when I'm blocked and someone doesn't want to receive what I have to give, that hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I am not opening myself up to receive, or in my case, I'm scared for good reason. I mean, I think, and I know you challenged this on me, right? I think that I've got such a situation that it makes me very hard to be there for.
Mm-hmm.
And you've always done such a beautiful job of assuring me that that's a story.
Mm-hmm.
But this give and take, I'm just picturing like bread. I'm just picturing like fruit and vegetables and just this like feeding each other's souls in this way. of connection, of attunement, of deep presence. And I'm not going to like hold people on the periphery anymore. And I don't think I'm going to be very satisfied with anyone holding me on the periphery anymore either.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so beautiful when you can find it.
Yeah.
There's such a deep longing. I have such a deep craving for that table.
I think we all do.
I hope this is making sense.
No, I think we all do. I think we're wired for connection. Back in the old days when we had villages and communities and people were there for each other, and we just don't have that. And I think COVID has made it even worse, geographically being separate from people. And you and I both have that wound of being too much and being so into our stuff and worrying that, for me, like I'm being too much for you and you're not going to be able to handle it. And you reassure me, I reassure you. It's a very normal and average part of our relationship. And I think that we have this concept of being in our stuff or being emotional or ugly crying. It's like, it's about how honored I feel when you allow me to be present for those unedited, raw parts of you. And it goes both ways. There's just such a beauty in that. And that's where that connection and closeness comes from. And if you've experienced people stepping on your heart when you open up because they can't handle it, then of course you wouldn't want to do that for anybody.
Yeah. You're reminding me of a moment I had this week. I think I shared it with you with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She was with her dad, so we were FaceTiming, and she was telling me about her day, and she was so full of, I don't know, just stress from the day. Maybe her eyes were getting glassy, and I could tell she was trying not to cry really hard. And I told her that she was beautiful when she cries, and that it really is okay to let some of that stress out. And she did for a minute and then smiled brightly and was like, I'm sure she had a good night's sleep, and just thinking about this idea about like ugly crying, or if you've ever been told not to cry, or that you're ugly when you cry, or God, one of the worst things is like, I'll give you something to cry about. I mean, how invalidating is that, right? Like any of these, maybe when we were really young, but this beautiful allowance. And it is such a gift to be able to meet in that space. It's reminding me of that Rumi quote, right? Like out beyond ideas of wrongdoing, right? There's this field and I'll meet you there. So if we can drop our defensiveness and really be able to hear, what each other's going through without making it about us. And it reminds me of that too. Yeah. And just being able to be there without any pressure. Like the person has it. Like my daughter had it. She just needed the invitation.
Right. Yeah. It can be so simple, but really, really difficult. When you were talking about when you feel like people don't allow you to be there for them and how that makes you feel pushed away, I was thinking about my mom has been asking a lot of, what can I do for you? How can I support you? And like, I don't know. I just don't know. And so I was wondering like, oh, does she feel pushed away? It's not my intention to be needless and wantless, but that is something that I struggle with. So yeah, that's a hard thing.
Yeah, it's so hard to accept help. I love that your mom is asking the question in that way, because I do think that that's really important, that when we don't know how to support someone, when we're completely clueless because we don't really know what's going on in their heads or in their hearts, or what the story or that they're telling themselves even is, or something, like to just ask that question is so grounding. I remember my friend Katie was the first one to really frame it to me this way, and it was really, really rich, right? Like, what would support look like? It's so humble, right? Because you're not saying, I know how to support you. I'm not saying I know what you need. I'm saying, what would be supportive right now? What would support look like? What might create a little sense of safety for you right now, or whatever is pertinent. Yeah. And then as far as answering that question, it's tough. Sometimes, I think some of the things that I'm wanting right now may actually be physically impossible. And then it's just, there's nothing to do. You just got to sit in that space of sadness. Yeah.
I think that there's something very powerful, especially when we're talking about trauma work, of knowing that you're not going through it alone, that sense of resiliency, that you've been going through some pretty tough things recently and there's pain in that, and you're well loved and well supported going through it, it doesn't take away from what your experience is. And I've talked about this too, of going through hard things, but knowing that I'm grounded, there are people that are here to support me. That sense of community and not being alone, I think, is what is part of what we need when we've had trauma and attachment injuries to work through that, because we can't control what happens in life. We can't control our wounding. We can't control getting activated. But knowing that somebody's got us and is there for us does really create some resiliency. I don't have a better way to say it. I'm wondering if you have different or other language that may make it more clear than I feel like I'm able to.
Well, I think you're being very clear. I mean, I might just add that, like, you're not just talking here. Like, the research is really pretty clear that for resiliency, at least in childhood, right, it really just takes like one person, one supportive presence. So when I'm doing IFS work, it's kind of like that self energy, someone to come and greet you in a space where there's no agenda. And this is where the whole, like, if you're defensive or self-defensive and the agenda really is, I'm not here to understand you, I'm here to make sure that I'm above reproach, right? That that my story wins or something, or I don't know, it gets so mucky. But the research is really clear that if someone can just be that type of so the type of presence is important. It's not just, okay, there's a warm body here. There really is a quality. And then, what are we talking about when we're talking about resilience? Like, really, like, if we don't use that word, right? What are we talking about? The ability to feel deeply what we're going through, acknowledge what we're going through, and be able to kick back up, right? Be able to bounce back.
Yeah.
Be able to understand ourselves with our trauma, with our human limitations, and still be in a space of self-compassion, understanding, messy. I know you call it messy middle. I call it humility. We've talked about that. So that resiliency, it is simple, but not easy. And if there was some way to develop this capability as humans to hear each other in a way that wasn't defensive, I think that's a big, giant piece. What are some of the other things? Curiosity, calm, presence. A lot of our modern life doesn't give us a lot of time for that, which is unfortunate. But it also doesn't require a whole lot of time. It's just like a touchstone. Just like, I know you're there, and I know you get me, and I know in some very sometimes complicated way, I make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, though, also that we can offer what we have to offer. And like with Jean, I said, if you want, I can come over. If you just want me to be present, I can bring my own stuff over and you can do your stuff and I can just be there. We can go for a coffee. That there are all kinds of ways that we can show up for people. And I think that when we can think, and for some people, like for Jean, it's making soup. She makes soup for people. That's what she does. Sometimes it's bringing flowers. So I brought some treats for the dog this morning. We joke, she has a pool and every time people come over, she's like, you don't have to bring anything. And her friend brings all these great things. And so I joke about wanting to just bring something random. So I took a picture of some water chestnuts this morning. I said, I could bring these if you want. She's like, I have 4 cans. And I thought, it was funny and an obscure thing, but using humor as a way to connect. I mean, there are all these little ways that we can connect and have deep meaning in a lighthearted way and letting people know, like, I'm happy to come over and just sit there. Like, you don't even have to do anything.
You pointed out something to me recently, which was the power of expressing that even if I can't be there for you, God, I wish I could. And I think sometimes that's its own form of defensiveness. Like, I'm not going to go there because I can't be here for you. And that's all there is to it. So there.
Right.
That just doesn't often feel very holding, very present, very attuned, right? But the attuning to, even because we are limited, right? And be able to express that humility. I can't be there for you this morning, but you're in my heart. I wish I could. I can show up the minute I can't. I am free. Or even just that wish of connection.
Right.
an
Right.
acknowledgement of the need when someone has been courageous enough to reach out with, hey, are you there? I'm lonely. I'm scared.
Right. And we've talked about, so the content is connection or loneliness or showing up, but it's all the things underneath of, I hear you. I wish I could be there. You do matter. You are important to me. That's where that connection is. And so it's often not about the content of can you come over or not, but it's, letting people know that you care, and maybe you can't show up, but there are other ways that you can share what your presence is, and how I was minimizing how powerful my emotional support is in my presence because I didn't show up with flowers for somebody else. I think that we also do this thing where we've got this wounding and feeling like we're not enough and we're not showing up enough, or we're getting that message from other people that have wounding and want us to be their puzzle piece, and like we just can't always do that. But it's okay to show up with what we do have.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. I know you need to run, so
I do.
yeah.
Thank you so much, though. Thanks for this.
Yeah.
It's so funny coming here. You wouldn't think that recording a podcast would feel like a break, but you create such a sweet, sacred space that, yeah, it's nourishing.
Oh,
I feel
thanks.
nourished. So thank you.
So, listeners, I am here. Jen is logged off. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that I want to say about this. If you find that your relationships are one sided and you are the giver, how is that for you? And where do you get your source of nourishment? And where do you get being filled up? And how do you feel about that? I think that we often think that we're too much. And so we know how to show up really well for other people, and we minimize or don't even know what our needs are because, I mean, this is true for me, that I learned how to be really valuable to other people. And then it gave me a sense of connection, or people would appreciate me. And then maybe I'd get some of my needs met secondarily. But for me to show up and say, I have this need and can you be here to support me? That's a tough one. And I'll tell you, one of the best gifts that people can give me is just showing up physically for me and supporting me while I do some of my stuff. That is one of the ways that I feel the most loved. And I don't think I asked for that very much. And I've shared with you that often my husband will sit with me and help me because I get overwhelmed by certain things. If things have a place and there's a system, I do really well. But if there's not a place, especially paperwork, there's not a place for things and there's not a system, I just really struggle. And there are times when I don't like what feels like neediness to me. And I almost want to reject my husband because he represents my neediness, because I just want to be able to do it myself. I think about a 2-year-old, do it self. I do it self. And I think that that's about not knowing and not getting the message when we were younger that it's really okay to have needs. It's okay to want things. It's okay to have needs and not get them met. But we often have so much unresolved and unexamined baggage around counting on people, having them not show up, that feeling of anger, frustration, disappointment. And so it's just easier, like, I'll just do it myself. I'll just get it done. And there is this just beautiful sense of community and connection when we have these reciprocal relationships and we allow people to be there for us. There's just something that's just so beautiful about that sense of community. So I guess my question to you is, if you look at your relationships, do you have, we're not talking about a ton of relationships. I have, a handful of people, a small handful of people that are my go-to people. And I would be there for them in a heartbeat. They would be there for me in a heartbeat because of that. I don't know, the trust, the openness, the vulnerability. Are you wanting that? Do you have it? What's keeping you from having it? And are there some barriers? And do you have that belief of it's easier to just do it by myself? I don't want anybody. I don't need anybody. Do you have the experience of trusting that people will be there for you? Or do you feel like you've got burned and you don't have that and you don't trust anybody to be there? So it's a lot of big, heavy stuff. I think what I'm going to do, since Jen hopped off, I normally record an outro for you that my editor, Laura, tacks on. But I think what we're going to do is we're just going to roll straight into the outro, and that will be the end of this episode. I hope you are doing well. I hope that this is giving you something to think about, and maybe you're either feeling grateful that you're recognizing that you do have this in your life, or you might be feeling uncomfortable or angry or frustrated because you don't. And so, if you don't, what are some things that we can do to help you to have more of this in your life? Jen and I both work with folks. You can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. This is very average, normal stuff. And if you struggle with this, my guess is that you did not have parents or caregivers who let you know that it's okay to have big feelings and to have big needs, and we're not able to show up for you and just hold space for you. I've told you my mom and I have done repair work, but whenever I cried, I was told to go to my room. My son had outbursts and I sent him to his room. It was not, I don't recommend doing it. I'm just saying sometimes we don't know how to manage our kids' big feelings and we don't have those skills. And so if you're needing help with that, if you're wanting support, Jen and I are both, we get it. We really get it. I think that's all I have for you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.